Hello and welcome to this edition of the Halcyon Blink. My name's Lorne Rising, I'm going to be your host for this episode. And on this edition, let's talk about a game that's kind of not really a game, it's three. Die Hard Trilogy. Why do I want to talk about Die Hard Trilogy? Well, in the vein of PlayStation games and the games that I sucked at as a kid and played later on in life, Die Hard Trilogy always stood out to me because, well, if no other thing, it was 3 games in one. You had the driving mechanics that were prevalent in Die Hard with a Vengeance. You had the over-the-top third-person style shooter from the first film, where you're trapped in the building and you've got to make your way through the game as John McClane on foot. And then you've also got the on-rail shooter of Die Hard 2. Why do I want to talk about this? Well, as a kid, the feeling of games stick with me more than the actual games themselves, and I'll explain what I mean by that. In Die Hard, for instance, I remember the terror, the literal jeopardy I felt as, for instance, Die Hard 2, you swoosh in and there's seemingly nothing wrong at first, and then explosions rain out of the front of an airport, gunshots galore, police running away, they pull up to the front, but it seems like you're the only one with a gun who's prepared to shoot the terrorists. Terrorists roll out, jumping and rolling in preposterous fashions with their heads cemented seemingly in place like this as they kind of move disjointedly, but then you realise, okay, well, I've got to shoot these guys. There was an impending sense of doom going into this because there were people everywhere. The camera would zoom and change direction all of a sudden. It meant that you felt like you had to keep on your toes. Now, yes, I understand that they borrowed this from a couple of other prominent gaming genres at the time, like I believe House of the Dead was probably before this game. Time Crisis, I would imagine, is probably before this game as well. But I remember it because of this. It almost had a realistic feel because everything, the senses were going around you. The music was dramatic and dark, and I remember the gunshot feeling real. And of course, I didn't play it with a PlayStation controller. I played it with a UV gun. It was the first time I'd ever used one of those things, and it was freaking huge, man. It was basically the size of a small Uzi, but I was using it as a handgun. But I remember it being fun. I remember it being challenging. I remember getting to the later levels and being legitimately frustrated by the amount of times I would get killed and the amount of times that I would kill innocent people because my shot was so bad. But they had interesting mechanics. You can select rockets and shoot them preposterously. You shoot the rockets and you get them. That's how shooters worked back in the day. But it had an accurate reload mechanic, so you always had to keep your eye on the bullets. You had upgrades like the MP5 mechanic. You also had tracer bullets, double damage bullets. You had bosses or head honchos. You had different elements to the levels, quieter segments. You had to keep your eyes peeled, and then all more balls to the walls action segments. It was great, but I felt engrossed because of the overwhelming nature of it all. The first one, though, in Die Hard 1, the third-person shooter, was a bit more difficult for me because I wasn't as good at the time at negotiating levels as I was now. I got lost easily. I would find it difficult to get to the next level, which meant that it was very difficult for me to play. Now, I do remember it being legitimately difficult. I remember being killed a lot. I remember that the first thing I used to go for was the massive sort of MPG gun because I felt that gave me somewhat of an advantage over the enemies. I do also remember that in both of the games, my God, did they have a lot of henchmen! Jesus Christ, out there, an army of people. How did that ever make sense to the developers to say, well, yeah, we've got a game to fill, so let's just throw thousands of people into this? If they'd have had thousands of people in the films, John McClane literally would not have had a chance. But I digress. As far as the first installment, the first game, I should say, within the games is concerned, it was my second favourite because, again, it wasn't amazingly difficult, but it was difficult enough for me to have to put the controller down from time to time. Die Hard with a Vengeance was the game I played the least, basically because the mechanics were terrible. The driving mechanics were always off, the thing looked terrible. The time trial mechanics always felt cheap because whenever you collided with something, you came to a dead stop. And I just didn't find the premise all that intriguing. It's the reason why I have the least to say about it. It's just one of those tacked on ones that I think the developers realised at the end of the game, oh crap, we need to have something with Die Hard with a Vengeance in it. Let's put him in a cab and let him race across the New York to get bombs. That sounds like a good idea. stupid. But on the whole, yes, I spent most of my time playing Die Hard 2, occasionally foray into Die Hard 1, and I tried Die Hard 3 from time to time, but I never got any good at it. What do you blame me for? I was 7. So, as an overall rating for this game, considering current graphics and things like that, yes, it's terrible these days because the graphics are terrible, the controls are clunky, and on-rail shooters are a thing of the past now that we've got first-person shooters. But I would argue that this game has some character to it and is worth revisiting, if nothing else, for the on-rail shooter because it's damn fun to do so. It still maintains its gimmick to this day. Unfortunately, that gimmick got beaten to death after this, so it was kind of hard for the gimmick to stay the course after that. But overall, I'd rate it as a 6 out of 10. Graphically, it's not held up in the slightest. Gameplay-wise, though, I would argue it's still reasonably fun to play, and a blast to play through for nostalgia purposes if you ever played it like me. So thanks very much for watching this episode of Halcyon Blink. Please like, share, subscribe, check out some of the other content creators in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, and as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys in the next episode of Halcyon Blink. Yippie Kay Yay, mother...